All right, let's get serious. So I am concentrating on the highlights for the front right slice, which means I don't have interest in the other bits and pieces here. It may be good to save this mask for later. One way to do that is to simply select the mask, active the mask, go to the channels palette, drag that mask down to the new layer icon, and then I've got this mask for later. I noticed that this mask is actually pretty harsh in the background. So if I were to use this again, I may do adjustments like a Gaussian blur on it. But better safe than sorry, so we'll go ahead and keep that. Let me deactivate that mask by turning off the eyeball. And this is the new mask, not the layer mask that I'm deactivating. Turn back on RGB and come back over to layers. Come into the mask itself, the layer mask itself. I'm just going to come in real quick with a hard brush set to black, set to normal mode as well. And I'm just going to quickly paint out all of this stuff because I just want the slice. And specifically, the right slice highlights. I'm going to be a little careful here. I do want just this area. Now's a good time to come in with perhaps the magnetic lasso tool. Beautiful. Look how well that worked. Yes. All right. Double click it. Oh, unless it crashes. Please don't crash. Oh, let me recover this. I'll be right back. All right, there we go. So let's go ahead and just grab that area, pop back in by clicking Alt and then clicking on the mask, holding down Alt and clicking on the layer mask, I should say. I'm just going to fill that with black. Very good. Now's a good time to come in with a standard lasso tool. Just grab this area, fill that with black. Can imagine that a lot of this time is spent in preparation by selecting small areas with masks and then coloring them in afterwards. So you can see where just a bit of time can make a big difference later down the line. So it's important to take that time, do those adjustments. Now's another good time to use the magnetic lasso. Having learned my lesson, I'm going to save first. Control S on my keyboard. Whoops. And I accidentally went a little too far in. Not a problem. Grab my magnifying tool with the Z key. Come in. And I'm just going to grab that lasso again. Hold down the Alt key to subtract. There we go. And I'm going to fill this area with black. Whoa, with black, I say. All right, there we go. Okay, so it looks like I have now the right slice isolated with a mask. Now's a good time to save this. So I'm going to pop back to channels, drag this, notice it's italics, drag it down here, and call this the front right slice highlights. Front right slice highlights. All right, pop back over to layers. Just click on the standard area. You can see now the part that I've painted in is reduced to only the highlighted area, which is great. Now I'm going to concentrate. Let's use greens and yellows for this particular area. I'm going to take the A channel and just slide down a little bit there. The A channel, the A style. And I'm not even blending yet. I'm just curious to see where all the highlights are. And then I'll come back in and start adjusting them a little bit at a time. Again, using 100% is usually a very bad idea, but I'm just doing it so I can see what I'm working on and not particularly for anything else at this stage. Okay, so I can see where I am and what I'm working on. I'm just going to toggle through a couple of modes real quick just to see how they behave. How does color work? You notice it's burning out a bit in the white. Overlay, that's a little bit softer. That might work well. Soft light might work quite nicely in this case. Hard light, I think, is a little overdone. Let's go ahead and crank that down a bit. Oh, you know, actually that could work. Hard light might work well. I'm kind of liking that. Okay, let's go in and start putting in some colors. I'm just going to start with hard light. Now, there are no rules against using multiple layers to color a single section, so we'll focus in a little bit at a time. And I'm just going to pick some darker green and set it to maybe 12%. I'm just tapping 12 very quickly on the top row of numbers on my keyboard, and that will let me come in and just do some adjustments. Now, because I have all these wonderful masks in place, I could actually use a softer brush. Now, here's a heads up when you're trying to pick a brush. Go ahead and just make a quick scratch layer here, and then set up a normal mode, 100% opacity. Just try some different hardnesses. Here it is at, what do we have here? Hardness of 19%, hardness of 38. I think that's going to work better. And check from time to time just to figure out what level of hardness you need. If you can't see it, how do you know? Do a quick scratch pad there so I know what it is. Labeling is very important in this. I'm not going to see any of these layers. I will never know if you labeled them or not, but you will have a lot more trouble if you don't label them, so do watch out for that. All right. And we'll just come in and start bringing in those highlights. Maybe pick a different color from time to time. You might ask yourself, well, what happens at the end of this if I'm not happy with how all this looks? Well, you can always come in with hue and saturation adjustment layers, and you can come in with curves adjustments as well. So there's always time to come back in and do further adjustments, even all the way at the end, in order to bring things where you need them. All right, so I'm kind of liking those highlights. I'm actually going to sample some of these highlights I already have with the Alt key, and I'm going to use that to blend these back a little bit. There's nothing wrong with having some whites or grays inside of it. You just need to make sure it's intentional. You don't want it to be an accident. So I'm just adding some lighter colors. Now, here's another thing you might want to watch out for. Keep in mind that the light will affect the color. So you won't necessarily, if you have delineated objects, it's kind of a bad way to put it. If you have objects that are on separate planes, see how these are different objects? It doesn't make sense for the colors to be the same, but just straight across. You'll want to make adjustments so that it's clear that they're not connected. You don't want them looking the same everywhere. Now, I'm using a pen pad just to speed this up, but there's nothing wrong with using a mouse. All these techniques will work just as well with the mouse as they do with the pen pad. It just takes a little more time. So do make sure that you plan enough time on this. Now I'm seeing an error in the mask, so I'm going to pop over to the mask by alt-clicking. Now's a good time for my mouse, actually. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to take my brush, set it back to, oops, don't want that. Set it back to 100% opacity for just a moment. Also set it to pure hardness. Get some black. So what am I doing here? Why am I doing it? I'm breaking it apart right here. And I was hoping to use the magic wand tool, but I see that it's actually connected everywhere. So not a problem. Just come in. And paint that away. Oops, a little too hard, a little too far. All right. There we go. Excellent. Let me grab the magic wand tool. Now I can just fill this real quick. Sometimes it takes a couple. Notice this white line. Whoa. That white line around it, that's because of the anti-aliasing. That's the soft roll-off of grays between the black and the white. You can generally get rid of that by filling multiple times. But do watch out. That means that you're destroying any chance of using your history to go back before the fill. So sometimes it's better to come in with a brush. Here we go. Now might be a good time to update the mask that I have stored. So I'm going to come back to channels, copy the name of this mask, duplicate this new one, get rid of the old one, just throwing it away right into the trash can. There we go. And back to layers. Just going to click on my layer, get straight back to the highlights. Okay, so the highlights are going pretty well, but it's hard to tell what I'm doing because there's no other colors in here. Ooh, I like that. There are no other colors in here. Let me knock this down a little bit. Ooh, let's make this fuzzy. So we'll, in just a moment, oh yeah, that looks a lot better. In just a moment, we're going to go ahead and, oh yeah, look at that. We're going to go ahead and attack the midtones. That way we can have some midtones and some highlights. Oh, that looks pretty good. I think I overdid it there. I'm going to add some white to this by switching it over to saturation, the S right here, and then just desaturating this to an almost gray. There we go. It's a little too much. I'm going to lower the opacity to 10%. Here we go. And just line that up. Okay, I think it's about time to work for a while on the midtones. So let's call this the highlights, our start of the highlights, and we'll move on to a midtone video. See you in a minute.